The Pulse Network. It's social TV.
I used to rule the world. Seas had rise when I gave the word. Now in the morning I sleep alone. Sweep the streets I used to own.
Hello, I'm Ed Gaskin. I want to welcome you to another edition of CMO Advantage. This is the show where we talk about marketing best practices and how they intersect with emerging technologies. We try to bring you subject matter experts and thought leaders to give you tools, tips, techniques, and technologies to give you and your company competitive advantage in the marketplace. This week's subject matter expert is Dr. Aaron Reed of Sentient Decision Sciences. So we're very glad to have you today.
Thank you for having me.
Having you return. And Dr. Reed is going to talk to us today about neuromarketing. It's a hot topic, a trending topic. And for all those CMOs out there who want to have a competitive advantage, here's one that you'll probably know that your competitors won't know about. So we're glad to have you on the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
So tell us some of the clients that you work with.
Some of our clients at Sentient Decision Science, they're global and national brands. Some that the viewers are probably familiar with include the Frito-Lay division of PepsiCo, Macy's, including their merchandising group out of New York, some local companies including Keurig, which is owned by Green Mountain Coffee Roasters.
And a little bit about your background. Like, how does a person get interested in neuromarketing? What's the background for that?
I'm a psychologist, a cognitive psychologist, and my research interests are in how emotion influences decision making. And of course, the latest wave in consumer marketing research is the application of neuroscience principles. And so my interests dovetail really well with this new wave.
All right, so let's take it away.
Yeah.
What's slide one?
Slide one, well, this is the future of market research. The future of market research as we see it is grounded in behavioral science. And behavioral science is made up of subdisciplines. One is neuroscience, one is behavioral economics, probably the most common one known is psychology, and there's also sociology and cultural anthropology. And today what we're going to focus on is really the intersection between neuroscience and psychology.
Okay. Is there a definition of neuroscience or neuromarketing?
Yeah, so neuromarketing is essentially the application of the principles and the measurement tools from neuroscience to marketing problems.
Okay. So what was the reason that we needed a new direction in market research?
Well, we've got a lot on that, and the reason that we need a new direction in market research is because consumers often can't or won't tell us the true drivers of their behavior.
Okay.
They're often either unable to, they don't have access to it consciously, or they're unwilling to. And you can see this on the slide that's up there now. We've seen in the recent popular psychology work, starting in about 1994 and now up until 2010 with David Brooks' The Social Animal, we've seen a lot of translation of the academic research on how emotion influences decision making being translated to the broader marketing world. And from that, we know that emotional reactions to products and to marketing are what happen first. And the cognitive justifications or rational processes come secondary to the emotional reaction.
All right. I'm going to go through a couple more points because I have a couple questions for you.
Sure. So psychologists are estimating that 95 to 99% of all human thought is occurring below conscious awareness.
Wow.
And so if that much is going on behind the scenes, we effectively need methods that can tap into that 95% to really understand what's driving consumer behavior.
Okay. Next.
Yeah. So some great examples to bring this to life. This is from Zaltman in 2003 and How Customers Think. Shoppers will explicitly tell you that there's no difference between a brand name drug and a generic drug, but they're much more likely to buy the brand name drug when their symptoms are severe.
Okay.
Yeah, can you imagine that? So
Basically you're saying if it's Bayer aspirin or CVS aspirin, you go with the Bayer. I mean, you go with CVS because it's generic and the headache isn't that severe.
Yeah, but if you've got a really bad headache, you're more likely to buy the Bayer, even when you're looking at the ingredients and saying these ingredients are exactly the same.
Okay.
So that's that irrational process at play there.
Okay.
So if the question is how much are you likely to pay for this drug, the answer is it depends on how sick you are.
Okay.
Which is kind of fun. Here's another one for you. This is also from Zaltman in 2003. 88% of consumers who said that they were very or extremely likely to buy a kitchen appliance did not buy anything.
Huh.
And that's
What
really
percent?
88%.
That's almost like 90% of the people.
Yes, who tell you explicitly that they're very or extremely likely to buy your product. Don't actually do it.
I have so many questions. I'm like chopping in a bit because one of the things I think about is top box research, right? When
Exactly.
people say 9, 10, likely to buy, likely to likely to refer a friend,
Yeah.
likely to be a repeat purchaser.
Yeah.
Would that hold true in those situations as well?
Yeah, that's exactly the case. So in this case, with the kitchen appliances, that's a top 2 box metric. So very or extremely likely. Those are things that we've relied on in the marketing world for years. We always look at those top 2 boxes to say, okay, what's the real potential here for my product? And we've known that it's never been exactly precise, but the statistics like that say 88% of people in your top 2 box don't actually follow through on what they're telling you.
So what does that mean for 6 and 7?
Yeah, yeah, for 6 and 7 on that scale. Well, it means that a top 2 box on that scale, it means we need different methods to really understand if people are going to buy your product and why they're going to buy it.
But some people do use word of mouth, right? So some people do check the 9 or 10 and they do tell somebody or they do repeat purchase.
Sure.
How do you explain that? Like if I'm a researcher and I'm conducting the study, I don't know what to make of this stuff.
Sure. So it's not, you don't want to throw everything that you've done in the past out. That's not the point here. We want to actually take the valuable work from traditional research methods and combine it with new methods that study the subconscious to get at the real drivers of behavior.
All right, I want to ask you more questions. Keep
Okay.
going.
We'll go. Yeah, we'll get
this
into
is
that.
good. This is good.
Thank you. So here's another one. This is a classic one from psychology. This is Schwartz and Clore from 1983. They did a very simple experiment. They asked people using a 0 to 10 scale, a traditional scale, to tell them how satisfied they were with their life overall. How satisfied are you with your life overall?
Okay.
And their experimental manipulation was very simple. They asked half of the people on a sunny day, and they asked the other half of the people on a rainy day.
Okay.
And you can imagine what the results showed. As you can see here on the screen, if we ask you how satisfied you are with your life overall, you're much happier with your life overall if it's actually sunny that day.
So does that mean people in the Sunshine State are happier?
We've got a blog post on that actually.
Okay.
In California and Florida. You can read about that on our blog.
Okay.
So another example of how traditional questions or traditional research may not really be capturing what's truly happening for consumers, especially if their answers are dependent on the day's weather.
So I remember when you looked at research design, we would talk about structured, unstructured, disguised, undisguised, and we would talk about doing an unstructured, disguised question to try to get at what was really going on.
Yeah.
Do those techniques still work?
Those are good. Those are the best of traditional research methods, and you still want to use those when you don't have access to some of the newer subconscious methods. But anything that you can do that's projective, that's indirect, that doesn't ask directly or explicitly, if you're trying to get at really what's happening for consumers, those are better methods.
Well, it's always interesting because even if you have those things, it's like, then how do you correlate it with something? So you say to somebody, would you rather be on a plane taking off or leaving? And so let's say they say leaving, but what is that related to? I mean, they've told you something that may not be, the question's disguised, but what is it that correlating to?
Yeah, and that's a key that you could incorporate that as a best practice in this kind of research. You always want to have some dependent variable of interest that you can correlate your subconscious research results to. So we don't want to just measure the subconscious and say, here are your results. If you're talking to a client, you want to say, here's what's happening at the subconscious level, and here's how it predicts some measure of interest that you're interested in, whether that's sales or choice or preference, whatever that ultimate measure of interest is. You want to be able to correlate the two measures. And we're actually going to show some examples.
All right, I won't stop, but this is so fascinating. I have to keep jumping. I'm sorry.
Here's another one. That's okay. So here's the question. This is from Pelham et al., 2002. And here's the key research result. People named Dennis or Denise are more likely to become dentists than people with other names.
No explanation for that?
Well, you would think that you were goal-oriented, right? You wouldn't think that something as important as your career choice would be dependent on the alliteration of your name with the actual profession. But that's just kind of a fun finding from psychology that says, how did you get into this profession? And apparently, I really don't know how I got into this profession.
I see. So I'm wondering if when I name my daughter, that's going to predict her future.
It may.
They should have that in the name books as well.
So all of these sort of setups really beg the question, if consumers either can't or won't tell us the true reasons behind their behavior, the true drivers of their behavior, can we really rely on traditional research methods to get us those answers? And on this slide that we have up here now, I think this is a good illustration. Here's something that we ask very frequently in traditional research. It's an importance question. We might ask you, please tell us how important the following characteristics are to you when voting for a presidential candidate. Let's say that. And then we give you a scale. And it's something from not at all important all the way up to extremely important. This is very common in market research. And so we say something like conviction. How important is that to you? And you say, oh, that's extremely important. You check off that top box. How about honesty? And you say, oh, that's extremely important. I'll check that off. What about optimism? Well, that's somewhat important. Intelligence? Yeah, that's very important. But how about some of these, like uniqueness? Or how about this one? Physical attractiveness of a presidential candidate. Now, on a typical research scale, you're going to say that's not at all important. In fact, only 1% of all Americans will admit that physical attractiveness is an important reason for voting for somebody for
1%?
president. Only 1%.
Okay.
A study we ran in 2006.
That was probably an error.
And 2008, yeah, and that was probably an outlier. But the reality is though, even though that's not the number one driver, the physical attractiveness of a presidential candidate actually does influence people's propensity to vote for that candidate. And so this is an example of something where people won't or can't tell you that it's actually influencing their decision, but at the end of the day, when they're in that ballot booth, the physical attractiveness of a presidential candidate actually influences choice.
So is that why candidates want to look like, for at least male candidates, they want to look as much like Kennedy as possible, compare themselves to the young Kennedy?
Very attractive man, yeah. And how about Mitt Romney? We did a study in 2006, and it was actually published in the Herald, that showed, again, that people wouldn't admit that physical attractiveness was a good reason to vote for Romney, but when you measure the subconscious, it actually is an implicit driver of liking for Romney as a candidate.
Does that differ for men and women as candidates?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't have any primary research to tell you about that. We did study Hillary Clinton during the 2006 primary campaign, but I could dig into the data to see if that's the answer.
All right, maybe that'll be next time.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah. So that's one example. And then one more example of traditional research that can't capture what consumers really feel or won't, what they won't tell us is the traditional agree to disagree statements. So think about brand associations. Like, tell me how you might answer this question. Do you agree or disagree with the following statement? Apple is cool.
Agree.
I strongly agree with that one, yeah. How about this one? Apple is expensive.
I would agree because I have to buy those stupid things for my kids. But
Sure. Yeah, those are the easy ones. Yeah, Apple is expensive. I love Apple. How about this one? Coke is global.
That's a true statement.
Yeah, yeah. How about this one? Pepsi is young.
Not getting you on that
Not so
one.
much. Pepsi is sexy.
Didn't they have Cindy Crawford as a model spokesperson one time?
They did. Yeah, but do you think of Pepsi as a sexy brand?
I don't think of it as a sexy brand.
Yeah, and most consumers would say, yeah, I don't agree with that. How about this one? Dove, the soap brand, is high status.
No.
They'll say no.
Is that the one with the moisturizer?
Yeah, exactly. But we actually know that the Dove brand does actually evoke feelings of status.
Really?
Yeah, and how about this final one? Chrysler is part of my identity. Would you
No
ever
way.
agree to that?
No way.
Not a chance. But we also know that self-identification with a brand, especially a brand like Chrysler, is a primary driver of brand preference and actually willingness to pay premiums for that brand. But if you ask consumers explicitly whether it's actually part of their identity, those measures aren't going to capture that connection. And so since the traditional measures can't capture that, we need
But you would have people
new
who would say
measures
that
to do
that if they were driving a Mercedes or a Ferrari, a Corvette,
Yeah.
Jeeps, you know, a lot of things where you have strong affinity groups, user groups, they would say that as part of their identity.
Yeah.
So was it because you chose Chrysler, or was it how you asked the question?
the strongest fan, the biggest brand advocates are the most likely to tell you that, yeah, this is actually part of my identity. But there are many other fans out there, people who love your brand and consume it on a daily basis, who actually won't say that. So it's a question of, do we rely just on those brand advocates, those most extreme consumers, or do we want to measure the degree of self-identification across our entire consumer base? And
Well, the
answer
reason
is
why
the
that seems to
latter.
be interesting to me is all people who go to a company's Facebook page and like it or become part of a fan.
Yeah.
So you know there's going to be some segment, but you're saying there might be more people than who've self-identified that or who put that label or their badge on their website.
Yeah, absolutely. And then it's also a measure of degree or strength. Like,
Okay.
how strong is my self-identification with this
Okay.
brand? And so since we have this trouble with traditional research methods, we need neuromarketing or new methods that tap the consumer subconscious in order to get at those things that consumers either can't or won't tell us. So we'll go into some best practices on that.
Oh,
Does that
fantastic.
sound good?
All right, great. So what are the best practices? So in other words, if
Yeah.
you're a company out there and this is, you want to apply the new theories of neuromarketing, these are some of the best practices.
Absolutely.
Please tell us what these are.
Okay, so we're going to go through a couple of different research methods. The neuro methods, including EEG, which stands for electroencephalography, measures electrical activity in the brain. You can see that in the lower left-hand corner on that slide, there's a cap that you place on people. You bring them into a lab or a central research facility, and you put the electrode cap on them. And then you can present them with your stimuli, either a new product or an ad or a concept test, whatever it may be that you're interested in marketing. And you can actually measure the electrical activity in different regions of their brain as they are consuming your product, as they are consuming any advertising that you have.
Okay.
That gives us brain maps, which tells us what areas of the brain are active during the processing of the stimuli that you're presenting to consumers. And so we can determine the positive and negative approach and avoidance emotion that people are feeling through frontal asymmetries in the frontal lobes. We can see if the emotional centers of the brain are activated. We can tell where their attention is by coupling those methods with eye tracking, so actually tracking eyes and simultaneously measuring neural activity while we're looking at what the consumers are paying attention to.
Got it.
So you get that immediate reaction. They're attending to one item in your ad, and then you can see the immediate or simultaneous neural response to that moment in the ad.
Okay.
Okay, so those are two methods. A third method that's used in our lab is skin conductance response. And skin conductance response
Is that what they do? They do like lie detector tests?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Lie detector test measures the degree to which you're sweating in your palm and essentially passes a small electrical current between two electrodes on two of your fingers. And as you produce more moisture in your palms, that conductance is...
So you basically give people a lie detector test on their, whether they like a product or not.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can think of it in that way.
Okay.
So it tells us a degree of arousal, and we're going to show you an example of that. So a couple of best practices that I want to just note here as we go into the proportion of emotion model next. I think that it's important for everybody as they use neuromarketing to approach it with humility. I think, and the same critical thinking that you're bringing to your current research projects. So just because we're studying brain data doesn't mean that it's the truth. The brain data that you're actually analyzing is dependent on the quality of your research design and what you've presented in front of subjects. So come into those experiments with the same
rigor, discipline.
Exactly. Just because we're watching brain maps light up doesn't mean that we have some essential truth. It's all dependent on how you've designed your experiment and the stimulus that you're presenting and how you're interpreting the data.
Okay, this is fantastic.
So we need to approach it with some humility. And we also need to make sure that we have the right sample, the right target audience in our sample.
Okay.
You can't just bring anybody into the lab and say, since I'm measuring the brain, I have the truth here. If you're going after a specific target market, you need to make sure that you've got that target market as part of your sample in the lab. And the last point on the best practices are develop or co-develop with a trusted partner quantitative measures of emotional response.
Okay.
So emotional response has typically been the domain of qualitative research, focus groups and deep dive interviews and that kind of qualitative research. But a study that we published in 2009 shows that emotion is actually quantifiable.
Okay.
So the degree of emotion that you're feeling when you're experiencing a product or looking at an ad is an indication of how much you value that product or how emotionally you are connecting with the ad that you're watching.
Okay.
And that degree of emotional response is a measure of value.
Got it. Of value. How is it a measure of value?
Because that is what the emotional system is designed for us in humans. It's designed as an approach and avoidance mechanism. It's essentially a valence flagging mechanism to tell me in my environment what I should approach and what I should avoid.
So like when I talk about microeconomics, I can talk about utilities, and we try to say what's a util or some kind of utility. In other words, we might do it on a conjoint, like this is greater than this or this is a preference. But you're basically saying I could take that same kind of measurement and connect it or correlate it with some kind of emotional response.
Yeah, they're highly correlated. They're not directly, it's not a one-to-one relationship, but the utils, or the utilities from a discrete choice study are highly correlated with an emotional response.
That's amazing. Okay, so that's why you did the thing to show emotion could be quantified.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. And what we find is that when we include emotional measures in with traditional conjoint measures, you're able to predict consumer behavior more accurately.
Okay.
And that we actually find that in that published paper in 2009, Emotion as a Tradable Quantity.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So let me give you an example.
Okay.
if we have time for this one. Here's an example from the paper. This is a diamond ring decision.
Okay.
So imagine you're choosing between these two diamond rings. These were women in this particular study. Diamond number 1 is 0.83 carats, and it costs $5,250.
Okay.
Diamond number 2 is 1.05 carats, so just over 1 carat, but it's $9,300.
Okay.
So in this study, we wanted to measure both the cognitive trade-offs, the traditional conjoint type trade-offs, as well as the emotional response to the diamond ring. And what was so interesting was that this decision was highly emotional. Maybe that's
I
not
just
a
know a lot of
surprise.
women just want to have at least 1 carat. Like
Exactly, yeah. And that's it, because in the decision around a diamond ring, there's a threshold at that 1 carat. That 1 carat level is very important. And the emotion that we measure actually captures that importance.
So guys, make sure you get that 1 carat, even if it's a lesser quality.
If you can look at this, you can see that diamond number 2 is only 27% larger than diamond number 1. It's only 27% larger, but it evokes 175% more emotional arousal.
Okay.
And since emotion arousal is an indication of value, you can see why people are willing to pay twice as much for a diamond ring that's only 27% larger.
All right. Do we have time to go to one of the videos of the cases?
Yeah, let's go into that. Okay. Let me spend just a moment on implicit attitudes, and then we can jump into a video. Will that work for you? Okay, so priming techniques are another way to tap into the consumer subconscious, and priming techniques are essentially the following. You'll prime a consumer with an image or a product, a brand, or an advertising, just very briefly. And what happens when you prime someone with a brand or an advertisement is that the cognitive connections, all of the automatic associations that they have with that brand or that advertisement become more active in their mind, and that accessibility of those attitudes influences their behavior. So an implicit attitude forms, and that implicit attitude actually influences their subsequent behavior. So you can see here, as we go into the example, when we present you with the Chrysler brand, some things happen in your mind automatically. Do you think bailout? Maybe. Do you think luxury? Maybe. Do you think success? Yeah, not traditionally, right? Not at least in the last couple of years. But Chrysler aimed to change that recently with their recent campaign during the Super Bowl using M&M, and I think we can roll this video.
Okay, let's see it.
I got a question for you. What does this city know about luxury? Huh? What does a town that's been to hell and back know about the finer things in life? Well, I'll tell you. More than most. You see, it's the hottest fires that make the hardest steel. Add hard work and conviction, and the know-how that runs generations deep in every last one of us. That's who we are. That's our story. Now, it's probably not the one you've been reading in the papers. The one being written.
So, M&M, Detroit. Tell us about what we're looking at here and why this was successful.
It's such a powerful ad. This ad is about self-identification. It's about who we are. It's about where we're from. That's our story. You hear the narrator say those things throughout this ad. And who did they choose to be the centerpiece of this ad? Detroit's own son, M&M, and where he came from, basically coming up and being very successful himself. And they use that really as a metaphor for what they're trying to do now with the Chrysler brand. Down in the depths, but they know about hard work, and they're confident in where they come from. And so their success, they're trying to connect with the Chrysler brand.
And so is that what the slide shows?
This is nice eye tracking data from the lab that shows what consumers are actually focused on during while they watch that ad, and they're focused on the American flag as we're tapping into feelings of patriotism, and they're focused on M&M and that smart gentleman coming across the street in that camel coat, which embodies success.
I see.
What's so interesting about this ad is when we tested it, we find that if you use traditional research methods to see if this connects at a subconscious level with the consumer self-identity, you can see in the bars on the left there that it doesn't actually capture that. That's traditionally a non-significant result. but the subconscious measures actually capture the effect. So
Okay.
this is an example where the subconscious is capturing something that the conscious actually cannot capture. And then you asked the question earlier, how do I know if this actually is meaningful? How do I know if it's actually going to matter in the marketplace? Well, we see that among those people who make that subconscious connection, they're much more likely to show a strong preference for the brand. So after exposure to the ad, preference in a conjoint type task basically doubles, and we find that the correlation with the subconscious measures at about 0.73.
And when they get in the marketplace, they actually buy the car.
Yeah, apparently the car is just flying off of the lot.
I see.
Yeah.
Well, I think they're telling me that I've just about used up all my time.
How about that?
So it sounds like with all the research you've been doing that you have plenty of stuff to talk about. So maybe it's possible we can get you back for another show.
Oh, I'd love to come back, yeah.
All right. I hope you guys enjoyed this as much as I did. I'm Ed Gaskin, host of CMO Advantage. I'd love you to come back next Friday at 2 and watch another edition to give yourself and your company tools, tips, techniques, and technology to get you competitive advantage in the marketplace. Until then, we'll see you.
Thanks, Ed.